As you might have noticed, the BlenderMan video is sort of in an odd resolution. It's a 2560 by 1080 resolution. Now I want to talk a little bit about frame rates and resolutions very quickly, and basically how they impact your project. So I'm going to start with a reference resolution. That's the resolution of my monitor that I'm currently using. Now my monitor is 2560 by 1440 pixels. That translates to about 3.7 megapixels. If we compare a 1080p format with that, which is 1920 by 1080, we're down to about 2.1 megapixels. Now the megapixel count sort of roughly translates into the time rendering. So if you've got the same scene and you would render it at 1440p rather than 1080p, then it'll have to render roughly twice the amount of time. Now this is not exact, but it gives you an indication of the effect of these formats on your render. So something that I used to do in certain projects to save myself a little bit of time is actually render at a 21:9 format at 2K, which is 2048 by 872. Sometimes you see it as 878, it's thereabouts, but this is just for demonstration purposes. Now what this means is that I have a slightly wider image, which I prefer because it looks slightly more cinematic, but it also meant that I had about 0.3 megapixels less, which meant it rendered slightly faster than 1080p. And if you have one or two computers at home and you don't have that much render power, it can make quite a bit of difference already. So for this project, I wanted to go a bit bigger, but rather than going for the full 1440p experience, I figured I'd go for sort of an odd resolution, which is 2560 by 1080, which is slightly wider than 21:9, so slightly wider than a cinema format. But as you can see, that equates to about 2.8 megapixels. Now, that's almost a quarter less than the 1440p, which means I'm saving myself quite a bit of time rendering this larger format, but it still looks really nice because it's still fairly big. So that's just something to consider when you're doing projects. Now, obviously, when you're working for clients, they will have certain preferences, but if you're working on your own projects, or if you have clients that are quite flexible about this kind of thing, you could actually use something like a frame format size to your advantage to have to render slightly less pixels and give yourself less of a headache. Now, another thing to consider in conjunction with this is actually your frame rate. So the BlenderMan video was rendered at 24 frames per second, which again is more of a cinema type frame rate. Here in Europe, where I live, the default is 25, and in the States the default will be 30. Now, again, if you look at these frame rates, you might say, well, between 24 and 25 there's not much of a difference. True, there isn't, but if you're in America and you're using 30, if you're only having to render 24 frames for every second rather than 30, well, you're saving yourself quite a lot of time again. So I just wanted to make this video quite short, but sort of illustrate the point that you can use these sort of technical little things to your advantage to give yourself a little bit more leeway when it comes to rendering.